Welcome to this presentation. Today we're going to be talking about subject-verb agreement. Here is a little cheat sheet that I set up, or maybe not a cheat sheet, maybe more of a kind of a summary of what we're going to be talking about. If you have the green version of the Aspen Handbook, we'll be starting on page 6 and going through page 10. If you have the red or the 4th edition of the book, we will be starting on here we go. We'll be starting on page 6 and going through page 11. Well, I guess page 11. So just pretty much the same pages. If you would, go ahead and get out whichever version of the book that you have so that we can be going through this together and making sure that we're covering everything that we need to. I'm not necessarily going to refer to every single part of these pages because I kind of set up this cheat sheet at least as talking points. Most of the time, native English speakers have no trouble with subject-verb agreement. We have heard people put together sentences. Maybe we learned English in the classroom because it's our second or third language. Maybe we learned it from the cradle, from our parents and caregivers. Either way, though, we've heard hundreds, thousands of times the pattern by which English words, subjects, and English verbs are put together. And so when a person puts them together in the wrong way, it sounds wrong to our ears. It sounds kind of ugly, or at least wrong on some level. And as a result, we kind of have this almost instinctive reaction of, ooh, that's not good. And so let's talk about what the rule is. Let's go through and kind of play around with the rule so we can see what it is, because especially if we're a native speaker, we've probably not thought about this very much. So let's get started. In order to do that, we're going to need to go through some general terms about kind of grammar and things like that. Of course, the first term is singular. We all know what singular means. It means just one. Plural means more than one, so two or more. So those are pretty easy ones. Then we have this word person. In grammar, we use the word person differently than we use it in everyday spoken English, and differently than we use it in the law. So this is kind of a third definition of person. And you can see I've documented here we have 3 persons, or 3 formats here. First person, second person, and third person. If you have ever studied a different language, you're probably familiar with first person, second person, and third person, or at least you're familiar with the example words that people use under those circumstances. First, we look at these terms from the perspective of the speaker. So the speaker, when he or she speaks about himself or herself, we call that the first person. After all, if I'm the speaker, the person I'm most interested in is me. So that's the most important, the first person that I'm thinking about. And so the first person singular is the word I. Now, I isn't the only word. I, it could also be me, my, mine, myself. But we're talking about it in the subject format, and so we would be saying I under those circumstances. If I'm the speaker and I'm talking to somebody else, then that person is the second most important person from my perspective. And I would call that person you. So if I'm talking about myself, I say, I live in this house, I shop at this store, I drive this car. But if I'm wanting to either ask this person with whom I'm speaking a question or make a statement about that person, I'm going to say you. You are very tall. You drive a nice car. How old are you? All of those things, when I say you, we both, from both English speakers, we both understand that I am referring to the person to whom I am speaking. And that's the second person. And then the third person is somebody who isn't the speaker and who isn't the listener, somebody who isn't part of this conversation. So we're talking about a stranger to this. I mean, we might both know this person quite well, but they aren't in the know for this particular conversation. And of course, that person can be a man or can be a woman. So if it were a man, we'd say he. If it were a woman, we'd say she. It can also be an inanimate object. It can be my book or my car or my pet or something. I would say pet's not an inanimate object, but something that we would refer to as it. And so that's the third person. Now, of course, when we're talking about I, the gender is clear. I'm a woman, so when I talk, obviously I'm talking about and I say I'm talking about a female. If you're a man and you're talking and you say I, you're talking about a man. There's really no need to have a particular gender associated with I because it's obvious under the circumstances, whether the I speaker is a female or a male. Similarly with you, if I'm talking to you and you're a woman, then obviously we both know what your gender is. If I'm talking to you and you're a man, we both know your gender. It only becomes relevant to talk about gender when it's somebody other than you and me having this conversation. Then it becomes helpful to kind of fill in the blanks because we're not able to actually see that person or communicate with that person. So that's why we have gender in this case, where we don't have gender in these cases. We have, for each one of these singular words, we have a companion plural form of this. So the plural of I is we. And what does we mean? Well, it means somebody and I, right? It could be you and I, it could be he and I, it can be she and I, it can be it and I, it can be they and I. There's lots of different combinations, but when we say we, it requires that there be more than one, unless of course we're talking about the quote-unquote royal we, and that one of those other people is, me, is I, is the speaker. Then the next part is you, and you notice there is no difference between singular you and plural you. In everyday conversation, most of us in the Dallas-Fort Worth area say y'all, which is a contraction. It's a contraction of you and the word all, and that makes it plural. If we were saying the North, we might say you guys. And of course, the plural is easy to see there because guys has an S at the end of it. If we were from Pittsburgh, we might say you'uns. Again, the S tells you that it's plural. But all of these expressions are informal, and they're spoken, and they're not written in formal language. So when we want to talk directly to the person who is listening or write directly to the person who is reading, we're going to say you, whether our audience is one person or our audience is 1,000,000 people. The same word is used. Now, that can create confusions in English. Many other languages have different words under these circumstances to distinguish between use. Another difference in languages is that many languages have a formal form of you and an informal form of you. We don't have either one. Of course, you could say y'all and you guys and you'uns is informal, but we don't have an informal that is something that can be written in a document. So those are just some, I guess, holes you could say in English. And so it's good to be aware of the fact that you have to use context to make it clear when you're saying you, how big is that you? For example, imagine I'm in front of the classroom and I'm talking, class has begun, a student has raised his hand, we'll say it's Bob, and Bob has asked me a question, and I respond by saying, you should do X. Well, in the context, it might not be clear. Am I saying Bob should do X and only Bob? Or do I mean you, the whole class, should do X? It's unclear when I just say you. In real conversation, I would most likely say you if I'm talking just to Bob, and I would probably say y'all if I were talking to the whole class. But if I were writing up these instructions afterwards, I would probably want to make it clear. Everyone in the class should, Or if I'm corresponding just with Bob, I'm saying, Bob, you should do X or Y or Z. Anyway, so that's a gap a little bit in English. Let's look at our third one. So we have he, she, or it as our singular form. And obviously you just use one of those, whichever one's appropriate. But when we make it plural, we lose all that gender information. And so if we have a group of men and we're referring to them, we're going to say they. But when we say they, it's not obvious the gender. It could be a group of men, but it could equally be a group of women. Or it could be a mixed group of men and women. Or it could be a group of objects, things that singularly would be it. Or it could be a group of men and objects, or women and objects, or men, women, and objects. So we just don't know. There's less information in that situation. Some languages have forms of they that retain the gender, that are, meaning many men, he, many women, she, some form of that, oftentimes adding an S to it if it's a Western European language. But we don't have that, so that's for good or for ill. Anyway, so that's what we mean when we talk about personhood in grammar: first, second, third person. You may have in English classes in the past, literature classes especially, heard about first person and third person particularly. And you may know that a first person story is one, we say it's written in first person, where the narrator is the main character. And so we're hearing about events through the eyes of that main character. So we hear a lot of eyes in that story. Third person, though, is the usual way. In this situation, the narrator isn't really a character in the story. He's kind of telling us the story, but all of the people that he's actually telling us events about, he's using words like he or she to describe their behavior. Okay, so we've nailed down the term person. Now let's look at it from a grammar standpoint. Let's say we wanted to write a sentence with the word dance in it. And we wanted to say something about the speaker doing a dance. Well, we would say, I dance, right? Pretty easy. If we wanted to refer to the listener and suggest that the listener is going to dance, we would say, you dance. You can see in that case, we've just taken the word dance, the infinitive form. I'll just put it up here, put a little space here. So the infinitive form, of course, in this case is to dance. And we've just taken the infinitive here and not made any change. We lopped off the word to, but we just have I dance. I, then basically the base of the infinitive. You dance, the base of the infinitive. It is only when we get to the third person singular that we make a change. So let's say we're talking about Bob, and I am the speaker, and I want to tell you, the listener, that Bob has taken up dancing. I might say, Bob dances, or he dances. If I were to say, he dance, you're like, what? Why'd you say it that way? It sounds kind of like you made an error there. What does that mean? It's going to throw you a little bit for a loop, especially if I'm a native English speaker. Why wouldn't you say the S at the end of it? And you and I, if we are fluent English speakers, don't have to think about adding this. We don't have to stop and say, oh, wait a second, I need to remember to put that S on at the end. No, it's an automatic thing. We've heard it so many times. We've said it so many times that it's automatic, like riding a bicycle, so to speak. So I would say Bob dances. Let's say I'm back to being the speaker and I'm talking to you, the listener, and I'm saying, I want to encourage us together to participate in a dance. I might say, we dance. Again, we're back to that root. Now I'm going to talk to you, and I'm in front of the classroom this time. I'm talking to 20 students in the classroom, and I'm suggesting we take a break and everybody just go ahead and dance for a little while. Well, I would say in that situation, you dance. You can see that our two U's are exactly the same. In fact, all of these are the same. And then we'll go to they. We're talking about Bob and his best friend Larry. And they like to go to clubs, and they are planning on going to a club. Actually they're in the club right now. I might say they dance. So this is also that same format. In fact, all of these have just the base of the infinitive except for this one. This is the only one that's different. We add that S sound. It's kind of not unusual, it's kind of quirky that we do this because actually in this situation our subject is singular and yet we add an S to the verb. So the S actually signals to us, this S right here on the end of dances, signals to us that that it's singular. Of course, the word dances, when it's a noun, you know, how many dances have you gone to? I've been to 4 dances. That signals the reverse. It signals a plural situation. So it's kind of an interesting way that we have it in English, where S on a verb usually means singular, S on a noun usually means plural. Okay, so I'm going to show you, so this is, to dance is a very regular verb. Let me put that also in here. Regular verbs such as to dance. Now we're going to look at the to be verb. For those of y'all that have gone through the passive voice material, you will remember that the to be verb is a really important one for that purpose. And unfortunately for us, it's irregular, meaning that it doesn't follow this pattern that we have up here. And so you just kind of have to, if you were ever an English learner in a classroom setting, you just had to memorize it. And in most languages, the to be verb is irregular. If you take French, it's être. If you take Spanish, it's ser or ester. It's pretty common for it to be irregular. The reason, there's lots of theories about why it's irregular in most languages, or at least most European languages, and part of the reason is that it's such a common word. People say it all the time, and when one person from one village ran into a person from another village and they each say it just a little bit differently, that has caused one version to become popular, maybe borrowing one part of the verb, then another one borrow another part of the verb. Anyway, that may be why these are more likely to be irregular than your other nouns. So typically, when a noun is irregular, it typically indicates it's more commonly used. And hard to imagine a verb in English more popular than the to be verb. Let's go through and look at the to be verb in English. We say I am, so first person singular is am. You are, second person singular is are. He is, third person singular is. And we can see here just a little bit of a hint of what we saw up here, because is ends with an S, just like dances ends in an S. We have we are, which is the first person plural. You are, which is the second person plural. They are, which is the third person plural. And you can see, similarly to dances, all of these are except this one is different. And it's not that different, am, are. I mean, they sound fairly similar. So that is how one example of a to be verb, one example of an irregular verb, but irregular verbs can be irregular in all lots of quirky ways. So these are just some examples. I wanted to show this one because it's such an important one, but also to show that there can be lots of variations in how in each one of the steps. This one, I'll just put this one in, we'll put it in green to capture that difference there. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that you can see that most of our problem is going to be distinguishing this category from all the others, because this is the main area of difference unless we're talking about an irregular verb. So getting this one confused with any of these other ones, that's where we're mainly going to be focusing our attention to. So let's just write a couple of sentences so we can get the flavor of it. Bob sings. Teresa knits. You eat. They swim. I fish. They do. This is just some examples of how the verbs work. In every one of these cases, if I had told you what the infinitive was and what the word was, you'd have no trouble completing the sentence and adding the verb. We don't have to think to do this. What the subject-verb agreement topic is about is not doing these easy peasy ones. If you were just learning English, these might be challenging, just like if you're taking a Spanish or French or other language course. Those might be challenging the first semester or even the second semester. But eventually, this becomes old hat. And so these aren't the ones that we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be focusing on the unusual ones, the ones that present problems. And I have 6 categories. And these are actually from the textbook, so I shouldn't claim credit for them. The first one is when we have what the textbook calls a long subject. And this is, typically when we have a subject, we think about it being, maybe one word. So let's just look at this. We might say, or 2 words, the men. The men ran. Okay? This is our whole subject right here. Pretty short. I mean, there might have been, 500,000 men running, but it's a short way of describing it. Or we might say the lions roar. Again, this might be a pride of, I don't know how many lions are in pride, but we'll say 20 lions. They might be very fierce, but we have a very short subject here. But let's think about a subject that is longer. The men and the lions ran. Probably the men were running away from the lions. But now we have a long subject. Both groups are running. And you can see how once you start adding more and more words to the subject, it becomes a little bit harder to figure out. This one isn't hard, but you can imagine if we start saying the old men with canes and the young male lions ran. It's now a lot more going on here. And the more that's going on in the subject, there's more of an opportunity for the speaker or the writer to kind of forget what happened at the beginning. When you and I speak, we don't have this sentence planned out from the very, before we say our first words. We don't have the whole sentence planned out to the very end. If we were to function that way, conversations would be very choppy because I'd need to take 2 or 3 seconds before I spoke any sentence. And then I could speak the sentence, and then you would have to take 2 or 3 seconds to compose your sentence and then kind of almost read it out to me at that point. Now, when I start saying this, the old men with canes, I didn't know where I was going to end. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with lions. And as a result, when I got to the end, it's entirely possible that I might have forgotten about the old men with canes. So it's especially easy in spoken English to get your subjects not matching your verbs. In writing, it can happen too, though. Since obviously writing's more planned out, there's more opportunities to fix it, to catch it. So there are kind of 3 categories of situations where we are concerned about long subjects. And the first one is when we have and. Now, honestly, this example I gave, in some respects, isn't that good of an example because we have 2 plural subjects. So we always had lions right next to the word ran. Well, we know that if lions is obviously plural, let me just change this to run so we can have it. They run. So it's obvious that when you have lions, whether you have anyone else running or just the lions running, you're going to say lions run. You would say a lion runs we would say the lions run. And so, we could have, 50 different things in front of lions, and it's always going to be plural. So, adding more stuff doesn't make this somehow singular, and there's not degrees of pluralness from a grammar perspective. So this, I was acting as if it was problematic, but you were, perhaps you were thinking, oh, it really isn't. I knew immediately without any reflection that it had to be run, and it couldn't be runs. But again, that's a function of the fact that I ended it with lions. But let's switch it up. Let me make it the old men with canes and the young lion. You might be tempted to say runs. But it shouldn't be runs, because we'll say the 3 old men with canes and the young lion runs. Well, we have 4 things here. We have Bob, Larry, and Harry, and we have Simba, the lion. So we have 4 creatures, and they're all running. And so if we were to replace this whole expression, we would replace it with the word they. And we all know that we say they run. We don't say they runs. That doesn't sound right to us. And so we know it needs to be run, but this word lion is immediately in front of run, and we're used to the pairing a singular word like lion with the word runs. We're used to this pattern. So that's the challenge that we have. And with singular nouns, or we'll say with at least one singular noun. Let's consider, so this is just so we can follow along with the book. This is rule number 1 on page 6. Let's look at rule number 2. And this is where we have the or nor. Now we know the basic difference between and or, and we're adding the 2 items together. So in this example, we had 3 plus 1, we now have 4. Or isn't about addition, it's about options. So if we said the 3 men with canes or the young lion, we're saying, well, it's either this 3 here, but it might be instead this thing here. It's not both. It's, go through door A where we have the 3 men, or go through door B where we have the young lion. Okay? Well, obviously, in that situation, we can have, let's first of all approach it when they are singular. So we're going to make our 3 men just one man, the old man with a cane or the young lion. So we have 1 or 1. Well, either way, whether we're with the old man here or in the second universe we're with the young lion, we both have a singular situation, right? So we would say, let's say we don't have the young lion at all as an option. Then we would say the old man with the cane runs, right? Because we add the S when we have a singular third person. But let's imagine that we go through door B, and we're going to pretend like the old man doesn't exist now. So we say the young lion runs, same scenario. We are going to add the S. So, or when there are 2 participants, so to speak, on both sides of the or singular, we use a singular verb. A singular verb, strangely, has the S on it. Okay, but let's switch it up. Let's go back and make it men and lions. We'll make it back to 3 old men. And the 2 young lions. So we have a total of 3, or door 1, the 3 old men are there. Door 2 has the 2 young men, 2 young lions here. So if we remove the possibility of the young lions, we would clearly say the 3 old men with canes. Do they runs? No, they run. And if we go through door number 2, then it's going to be all about the lions. The 2 young male lions, they are going to run because this is our choice here, right? So because both door A and door B are correct when we say run, when we put them both as possibilities, we're still going to be in a run situation. Okay, so that is our rule number 3. Now, rule number 4 is a rule of convenience. It's a rule that lets you say, look, you know what, you want to trust your ear. You're a native English speaker. Usually when you're speaking especially, but even sometimes when you're writing, you're not thinking about grammar. Your brain is kind of on automatic grammar pilot, so to speak. And so when you have and there's no real reason if one is plural and one is singular to prefer the plural or the singular when it's joined by or. Now, of course, if it's joined by and, then if it's one's singular, one's plural, it really is plural because it's an addition type problem. But here, we're talking about 2 alternative universes. So I'm going to make, we're going to say there's just one man. The old man with a cane, or the 2 young lions. Well, if we live in universe A, so we're going to make the lions go away, we would say the old man with a cane, we would say he runs, right? I'm sorry. Okay. That's door 1 is going to go with runs. But door 2, the one where we're with the lions, the 2 young male lions, they run. So door 2 has us just say run. Door 1 says runs, door 2 says run. Which one are we supposed to prefer? Well, the rule is look at the one closest. Well, in this case, it's lions. So lions run. We'll be looking at this format. So you're correct with run. But if we switch it up, we'll make the men plural. And there's just going to be one lion. So now the 3 old men with canes run. The young male lion runs. Well, this is still closer to our run word, so we need to add an S. Obviously, if we flip this and put the lion first and the 3 old men second, then we'd be back to run. So that's the or category. And so it's basically which one sounds better. Let's look at rule 5. And that has to do with the situation. Well, actually, we're gonna wait on rule 5. So I'm gonna flag it for now. We'll talk about it in a second. So put it in blue here. Now we're gonna go on. So at this point, the rules we've talked about, you may think to yourself, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I think I would have probably gotten those right on a test. Some people do miss those, but probably more often than not, people get those right. Our next category are hard. I'm going to be honest with you. To this day, I look these up pretty routinely when I'm working in this area because I forget the rule. And this is so true for me, at least, is that I am always looking up these types of rules. I don't trust my memory. I want to get it right, and there is an answer to all of these questions. Rarely is it do what you want. And so I want to make sure that I'm getting it right. And it's not a big deal. It's not hard to Google this stuff. It's not hard to go to your Aspen book. So I'm going to go through some rules, and I hope that the answers will stick in your head, in your brain. But if it doesn't, no worries. Just Google it. Just know there is an answer, and just know you can't trust that your ear is going to point you in the right direction. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, what is an indefinite pronoun? Well, a definite pronoun is something like he or she. So if you and I'm the first person, you are the second person. You and I are talking about Bob. We both know Bob. We know what he looks like. We know where he lives. We know stuff about Bob. It's clear to us. We both have mental images of who this Bob guy is. And I say he, right? That's how I refer to him as we've gotten into the conversation. You know, he works at the bank, or he drives that car, whatever. We both know what we mean when we are saying he. We mean that guy named Bob. That's a definite pronoun. There's another category of pronouns that are called indefinite pronouns, and they don't refer to a particular person. They refer kind of to a generic person. And many of these words end in one or body. So everyone, anybody. So you can hear it in everyone. When I say everyone, I'm not talking about just Bob or just Teresa or just the three old men with canes. No, I'm talking about kind of a mythical person, an abstraction. I'm not thinking about a particular person with a whole life history and all kinds of things like that. That's what an indefinite pronoun is about. Now, indefinite pronouns can be singular, and if they are singular, they fit into this category. Or they can be plural, and if they're plural, they fall into this category. So you might be adding an S to the end of your infinitive stem, or you might not be. When you do and when you don't is not very intuitive to most English speakers, because most of these words that you see on this list, at least for me at least, imply plurality. When I hear everyone, that to me sounds like lots of people. It doesn't sound like a single person. It sounds like Bob and Teresa and Larry and Mary and Harry and Carrie and anyone else out there. It's the universe. It's everybody, millions of people, or at least lots and lots of people. And that's a plural idea for me. Anybody is a little bit less plural to my kind of instinctive sense, but it could be several different people. It could be Bob or Teresa or whatever. And so I still have a notion that it's plural. So the meaning of these words suggests pluralness for me many times. But when you look at both of these words, they look singular. I mean, after all, this word literally has the word one in it. I mean, you can't get more singular than saying one. There's no S at the end of it. Body, again, just one body, not bodies. So structurally, many of these words look singular. And you'll see a list of these words on page 7 of the book. Let me go ahead and just show you this list. Anybody, there's no S. Anyone, no S. Each, either, every, everybody, everyone, neither, nobody, no one, nothing. One, somebody, someone, something. All of these, anything, they don't have anything on this list, but anything would be another example. This is not an exhaustive list, as you can see. So all of these are like the he, she, it word. All of these would take the S. So if we're talking about, let's just conjugate dances, the word dance. Anybody dances, anyone dances, each dances, either dances, every dances. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but everybody dances, everyone dances, neither dances, nobody dances, no one dances, nothing dances, one dances, somebody dances, someone dances, something dances. You need to add that S even when the meaning, like everyone, kind of implies plurality. But there are some of these indefinite pronouns that are plural. And most of the time it's kind of clearer what they are. And you can see all of these suggest a numberness about them. And that's not a word, I just made it up, but a numberness. It suggests that you can count the items and the count is more than one. You know, for the word both, we mean two, right? I mean, a pair, basically. A few, I think 3 to 7. Many, probably 4 to 10. Others, we can actually see the S on this. Several, maybe 5 to 12 or something along those lines. They have a numberness, a numerosity about them that these don't. One way that I find helpful to think about these singular ones is to think that when I'm talking about everybody, I may be talking about a group of 100 people, but I'm looking at each one individually and saying, Bob, you're part of everybody. Teresa, you're part of everybody. Suzanne, you're part of everybody. And I'm really looking at Suzanne. And then maybe I can look at Bob next. But each time I'm focusing upon that individual person. But when I say both, I'm not looking at just Bob. I have to be looking at two people. I'm looking at both Bob and Larry. If I'm using several, I can't be looking just at Bob or even just in Bob and Larry. I need more than two. And so that's kind of my way of approaching that. Having said all of this, I get everyone and everybody correct, but many of these others, and I get one correct, but many of these others I will Google. I will say most of these I'm going to Google if I'm going to put them in an email most of the time. Because I know that this is a hard one to keep track of. I mean, it's hard for me, at least. Maybe it's not for you, but if it is hard for you, you are in at least good, I don't know if you're in good company, but you're in company with me, and we just are stuck Googling this until one day maybe it clicks in a final way. There are some that can be plural or singular, and I especially despise these. I really, really despise these. Um, because I can never remember these. It's just a lost cause. To me, some should be up here because some to me means more than one. And so it's more like a several or many situation. None to me, I mean, it's kind of neither singular nor plural because it's zero. Now, most and more aren't numbered. Necessarily. Anyway, this is just hard. This is hard for me to commit these to memory. I end up looking up a lot of these terms, but that's okay. It's okay to be the person who looks them up. It's better to be the person who looks it up and gets it right than the person who doesn't get it right. And if you're like me, you'll miss a lot of these if you don't look them up. So the takeaway here isn't so much that I'm asking you to commit these to memory, but I'm letting you know there is a rule with respect to these terms, and that as a legal writer, you're responsible for getting it right. So when you use these terms, stop yourself and say, hey, isn't it one of those terms that Groover told us we need to double check? Okay, let me flip through and find it in the book. So just think of it as like I've put a sticky in your brain. Hey, check this fact. Don't assume your ear is going to tell you which one to use. Let's go through a few of the examples to see if we can have things click here. Each of the complaints alleges. We have our word each right here, so we know it calls for a singular. Each alleges. Everyone in the courtroom was seated. Everyone is always singular, so we need to have was. No one was absent. We have no one here. It needs to be singular. We need to have a was. Many of the documents were. Many is always plural, so we're using were. Both contracts contain. Both's always plural, we have contain. Neither of the plaintiffs lives in the county. Neither is always singular. These are the tricky ones. So let's look at some examples of these. Okay, so how do we decide whether they're going to be singular whether they are in fact singular or not. Okay, so we're going to look at the rest of the idea. All the board members were present. Well, this is a countable noun, right? We can, we don't know in this story if there's 3 board members or 300 board members, but people can be counted. And so this is a countable number, and it's got to be more than 1 because we've got this S on here. And so that tells us it's going to be plural. Money, I mean, in some sense it can be counted. I mean, I either have $20 or $25. But the word here isn't dollars, it's money. And money isn't a counting item. So if it were all the dollars, we would say are counted. But we're talking about money, it's like grains of sand. We can't count those. So when it's a not counted, so all the sand is counted, or all the salt is counted. When it's not a countable number, we're going to say that it's singular, and so it's all. Here we have some of the documents. Well, obviously we're talking about more than one document. We can count the documents. We've got an S on it. And you can see money. Another thing is that money is not countable because, so we don't put an S on it. Just like when we talk about salt, or we talk about sugar, or we talk about flour, we can't count it, so we think about it as being singular. But this one, documents can be counted, so we say some. Some means more than one of a countable item, so we're going to use plural. Here we're talking about a portion of a singular item, the document. So a portion of the document means it's less than the whole document, so it's in some sense less than 1. And so we would call that singular. It was edited. But again, just remember to Google the rules. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our cheat sheet, and so we have covered all of these. I'm going to just gray this out. Let me just gray it out a little bit. And now we're going to go on to a collective noun. I'm going to go over what the American rule is in this area. If you grew up or have spent a lot of time in Great Britain or in some other part of the world that British English is more common, this may sound a little bit odd to you because, again, we speak the language that we've heard most commonly. And that is that in American English, when we have collective nouns, we follow the grammar, we don't follow the meaning. But my understanding, and I've had different students tell me different things, but I've heard that British English more often follows the meaning than the grammar. Whether it is or is not the case, though, in American English, it clearly is the case that we follow the meaning. We follow the grammar, not the meaning. So we say the team. Let me go ahead. We say the team is winning. Okay? Well, obviously a team has to include more than one player. And so out on the field are 10 players playing, and each one of those 10 players is winning, and they are together winning. But we don't say the team are winning, because after all, it's just one team. And so our subject is singular, and when we have a singular item, we put an S at the end of it. Let me just say wins, so we can wins. If we were to say the 10 players, we would say win. We could even say the 10 players on the team win, because our subject is still players. We have a lot of these words in English, words that are structurally singular but have a plural meaning. Now let's imagine that this is a tournament and there's 10 games going on at any given time during the tournament. And so that means at any given time, 10 teams win, right? So you can take a collective noun and make it plural, and then obviously under those circumstances you're going to use the they form. right? That goes without saying. Here are some examples, and I'm turning to the textbook page of collective nouns. The jury has adjourned to deliberate. The jury typically has 6 or 12 members. Each one of those jurors has adjourned, right? He's left the session. I'm sorry. But they are a unit. In some sense, they've lost their individuality. And so we think of them as a unit. We don't think of them as individual people. And we're looking at it grammatically. This is a singular noun, so we ought to use, let's say, adjourns. We ought to use the he, she, it form. The evidence shows. There might have been 50 pieces of evidence in that case, and yet we consider it a unit. We structure this word as if it were singular, as if it were just one unit. And maybe there just is, it's possible there's only one unit there, but there could be lots of pieces of evidence, and we say the evidence shows. So you get the flavor of what we're doing here. Look at the format, look at the structure, look at whether the word is grammatically plural or not before you decide what format you're going to use. If it's grammatically a singular, even if it has a plural meaning, we're going to follow the he, she, it format. If it is plural, structurally, we're going to use the they format. Of course, some words become plural irregularly, and so when you look at the word and you can't tell, Google it and find out whether it's a plural format or not. Okay, so let's go on to our next category here. Oops. Okay. This is, I think I've somewhat changed the name. I guess it's intervening words in the textbook, but I'm calling it words between the subject and the verb. Let's just... Okay, this is kind of a silly sentence. Mary, who learned to swim while living on several Polynesian islands, yodels. You can see this is our subject, and this is our verb. Only these two words need to match. And Mary is a singular third person in the story, so we need to put an S at the end of our verb. Our verb, the infinitive form is yodel, and so we need to add an S and make it yodels. If we were to remove all this middle stuff, and I were to say Mary yodels, there wouldn't be any hesitation in us, in anyone in this room, saying yodels. That's obvious to us. That sounds very clear. But when we put all this stuff in the middle, we forget about poor Mary and who we're talking about. And in fact, many times when the word right before our verb is in plural, then we think we're in this universe. We think we're in the they universe. And so we might leave off the S. Let me just read it so you can hear it this way so you can see the temptation. Mary, who learned to swim while living on several Polynesian islands, yodel. It's almost like the islands are yodeling. I mean, let's imagine that an island can yodel. Islands yodel. I mean, that's how we would say it if it were a thing, right? And so it's easy for us to forget that. And so when we have lots of words in between, we have to remember to go back to the subject. And part of that is thinking about the verb and saying, well, who's doing the verb? In this case, it's pretty easy. We know islands don't yodel. So we know it's got to be Mary. Once we find the subject, then we can figure out, well, is that subject singular or plural? Let's look at the textbook, for example. I see we need to look for some more examples. Let me scroll down here. The discrepancy between the books and the accounting records have been resolved. That's incorrect because, let me highlight it. Let me do this here for a second. Because this is our subject, discrepancy, a singular word, but this is plural. We say they have. But here we have discrepancy, a single word, and we have has. It has. The discrepancy has. So if you remove these words between the subject and the verb, we'll see that it now matches. The discrepancy between the books and the accounting records has been resolved. But let's imagine that this were our sentence. It doesn't really make sense, but let's imagine this were our sentence. The accounting records have been resolved. Well, that's a good sentence. We ought to have if records is our subject, because records is plural and have is plural. They have. So that's why we find this maybe a little bit compelling. Here we have the remainder of the goods to be distributed are in the storage. So our subject is remainder, singular, are is plural, they are. Here we have remainder, singular, is singular, it is. One of the best experts are available. One is singular. Going back to our chart, on our chart, that was one of our indefinite pronouns that has to be singular, but we're using are here. They are. One of our best experts is available. A point, and this is again one I always Google. So if you're like me, you're in good. Well, if you're in good company, but we're in the same company. This seems like the situation where we say and. Let's read it this way, then let's rewrite it and consider that. The attorney, together with the paralegals, has reviewed the contract. This is the subject. There's just one attorney, and so we say has. He has or she has. But let's rewrite this sentence. The attorney and the paralegals. I'm going to get rid of our commas. The attorney and the paralegals, now we have to change this to have because we have a plural subject. Remember, our rule 1 said that we need to do this. I think it was rule 1. Let me go back and see. Singular subjects joined by and usually take a plural verb. So this becomes a parenthetical idea. We're really just looking at the attorney. And this is kind of like, oh, and by the way, other people looked at it. But we're really focusing upon the attorney. The exhibits, as well as the report, show a pattern of traffic congestion. The exhibits show. Now this one, even if we said the exhibits and the report, we'd still have to say show. Even though report is singular in an and situation, a plural and a singular obviously are still a plural. Okay, so that is our, let me go ahead and clear this. Clear. Okay, subjects that are after the verb. This is an inverted sentence situation. Let me go back to our text here. And we have, I went too far, sorry about that. We have inverted sentence order. And this is when you have the verb coming before the subject. We see that structure in poetry, pretty commonly, but we also see it occasionally in written or spoken English. It sounds a little odd to our ears, but it's not grammatically incorrect. But this structure, because we haven't said the subject yet, so we don't have our kind of memory activated in that area. So whatever verb we choose, we're almost kind of flying blind with it. We might luck into the right verb or we might not. When we say the subject first, our chances of getting the verb right seem to be significantly higher. So now here are some examples. Enclosed are 2 copies of the contract. Well, here is our subject, right? And actually we've written the sentence up here. 2 copies of the contract are enclosed. So we have 2 copies is our subject. Obviously that's plural. Are is also plural. 2 copies are. None of us would miss that, or especially if we eliminate of the contract. If we got rid of that, 2 copies are enclosed, we'd all get that right. But here we're saying enclosed, and many of us would say, I might even say enclosed is 2 copies of the contract, because we haven't really planned out what we're going to say after we say is, because we don't have this, we haven't paused for a few seconds before composing the sentence before we start talking. And it's fine in spoken English, or at least it's not a big deal in spoken English to make that error. But when we're writing something, we have the opportunity to say, okay, no, but what's our subject? I mean, enclosed isn't a subject. This is actually the past participle under this circumstance. This is actually in passive voice. This is the subject of the sentence. Another common one is the there is. This is idiomatic with English. If you speak French, you know that the equivalent is il y a, which is always singular. You always have, I think this is true, always, even when it's a plural subject that follows that. But in English, we don't do that. We say there is or there are. In this case, our subject is singular, so we say there is a suggestion for compromise. But let's say there was more than one suggestion. We would say there are suggestions for compromise. So be sure if you invert the word order by using a there is or it is structure, or you literally invert the order, that you keep in mind, hey, I have to find the subject to make sure it matches. So I think that we are done with the subject after the verb. And we have 3 idiomatic things that I wanted to talk about. The first I've kind of already addressed, because, oh, actually, let me go back here. We talked about each and every, it's listed in the long subject section, but it's also, these are also indefinite pronouns. So that's why I highlighted that. So we actually discussed each and every, we were talking about indefinite pronouns. Let's go to talk about you. We've already kind of talked about that. We talked about the fact that we use the same format for you, whether it's meaning something singular or meaning something that's plural. I say it's idiomatic. I don't know if you, I think reasonable people can differ about whether it's idiomatic or not. But what I'm saying when I say idiomatic in this context, I'm saying is these are just rules we have to remember. And actually, you don't have to remember them because you already do know them because you speak English. So we say you are, even when, I might take this sentence, I might say this. Bob, you are smart. Well, Bob is just one person, right? We wouldn't say Bob are smart. We would say Bob is smart. But I'm talking directly to Bob, so he is the second person, singular. And so I'm going to say you are smart. If I'm talking to you about Bob, I'm going to say Bob is smart. So all I'm noting here is that in this case, the you second person singular is different than the he, she, it third person singular, that we have an S in one situation and not an, or an are if we're using the to be verb versus an is. So let me switch this up. Bob you dance, or Bob dances. Okay, so that's you. Another thing, and this is idiomatic, but your ear will tell you that this is how we do it in English, is a time. We say, and also money, I guess I should add. Time and money are singular. So 3 hours is enough time. Well, 3 hours is plural. I mean, we can hear it, the word 3, and we have the word, we put it as the end of hours. But we usually don't say 3 hours are enough time. And again, that probably goes back to the idea that time isn't countable in the same way that stones are countable or things along those lines. Similarly, money, when we're thinking about it as a unit, as all the money together, we think about it as singular. So $3,000 is a lot of money. We wouldn't say $3,000 are a lot of money. And then finally, when we refer to our country, we don't think of it as a plural word, and yet obviously there's 50 states. We end it with an S, but we don't say the United States are at war with the Klingons. No, we say the United States is at war with the Klingons because we consider it one unit. So those are just some examples of idiomatic expressions. If you start using one of those, you're like, wow, I don't, am I right? I'm not sure. Just Google it to confirm that. There are some challenges that you might want to play around with in the book. These are on page 10 in the green book and on page 11 in the red book. And again, the answer key is in the back. So once you go through those, if you aren't quite sure why the answer is what it is, come see me and we will talk about it in more detail. You'll see on the assignment that this one, the long subject one, is where most of the activity is going to be in terms of errors on the grammar proofreading assignment. I may have one that falls into this category, but most of it is going to be in the long subject category. So be on the lookout for that as you complete the assignments. Thank you for your attention, and I will also be posting this little cheat sheet that might be beneficial to you as well. Thanks again. Bye-bye.